Our goal here is to autofocus this content editable when we add a new thing. And I said that we couldn't just use autofocus, and you saw that in action. It didn't work. So we're going to need to use a lifecycle function called component_did_mount. Now, lifecycle functions, if you use them, I would put right under the constructor, if there's a constructor. If not, I'd put them at the very top. And that is just a convention. It's not a rule. It will still work. But it's a lot easier to tell when you're reading the code, whether it's your code or someone else's. It's a lot easier to tell whether that stuff is there if you only have to look in one place. So component_did_mount like that. So just by naming the method that, it's magically going to do what React promises. What does React promise anyway? Component_did_mount. So this is the page in the React docs about components in general. It has a rundown of all of these lifecycle functions. Let's see what it says about lifecycle methods, period. Each component has several lifecycle methods that you can override to run code at particular times in the process. Methods prefixed with will are called right before something happens, and methods prefixed with did are called right after something happens. So mounting. These methods are called when an instance of a component is being created and inserted into the DOM. So when you hear mount in these method names, that means actually inserting stuff into the DOM, making them real. So the constructor, component will mount, render, component did mount. Updating. So there are several that run because of changes to props or state. Unmounting. Blah, 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 blah. So around mounting, component will mount, component did mount. I said that's the one we want. Why? Because we're going to need access to a DOM node in order to focus it. So we have to make sure that the thing actually exists by that time. Can't mess with the DOM node until the DOM node exists. So we need a reference to our content editable. Right? When we mess with a form field, we put that ref thing on it. So we're going to do the same thing. That works on any element. It doesn't have to be an input. So we'll put ref equals, and you could call that whatever you want. I'm going to call it name input. So this gets an arrow function. I'm going to call the parameter input. So that's a reference to the thing. And then I'm going to save that reference as this dot name input. Even though it's a content editable, so it's technically a div, not an input, but I think this is a little clearer. So now this dot name input is a reference to this content editable. Which means that up in component did mount, I can get to it that way. So I'm just going to comment this out and play around in my console for a minute. Let's find our thing, any old thing. Here's the thing component. Now that's $R because it's highlighted here. So $R dot name input. And we see it's this content editable component. Just what we wanted. So what kind of stuff does that have? Well, it has one called dot last HTML. That's equal to pencil. So that's the value that's in there right now. If I change it to have two L's for some reason, it has two L's now. So, worth noting. Now, when I looked at that thing, I also saw HTML, which looks like it's the actual div from the DOM. So if we could grab that and call focus on that, that might do what we want. r.nameinput.html does in fact give us the DOM. Now if we call focus from the console, it's not going to do anything because it's the console that has the focus, not the actual browser window. So the fact that the browser window is focused there doesn't do us any good because we're not. But that's worth trying inside component did mount. So component did mount. This.name input dot HTML L dot focus. Add thing. Oh, look at all that focus, bub. Cuss, yeah. Uncle Cussa. I like it. What if I get another one in here? Yep, does the same thing. Pretty groovy. It's complaining save thing is assigned a value but never used. On line 19. So inside render, we extracted that out, but we no longer call it from inside render, do we? Because now that's in the actions component. So we can go ahead and get rid of that reference to a thing that we don't need. It's not exactly hurting anything, but it's better not to have references to stuff you're not going to use. If you must do that for clarity, prefix it with an underscore, just so it's clear that it's not something you need to care about. Autofocus new things.